call the Executive By Board meeting to order for Tuesday, July 26, 2022. Due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, in accordance with Chapter 22 of the Acts of 2022, suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, public bodies otherwise governed by the open meeting law are temporarily relieved from the requirement that meetings be held in public places, open and physically accessible to the public, as long as measures are taken to ensure public access to the body's deliberations through adequate alternative means. This meeting will be live on Zoom. The public may participate remotely by joining Zoom meeting ID number 854-0032-4335 or by calling 929-205-6099. For additional information about remote participation, please contact Carly Antonellis, Assistant Town Manager at ATM at Ayer.MA.US or 978-772-8220 extension 100 prior to the meeting. All right, thanks everyone for joining today. The first item action we have on the agenda for today is review and approval of the previous meeting minutes from June 29th, 2022. Everyone's quiet today. I don't know how to take that, but all right. Are there any issues with the meeting minutes?
No, I'll make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from June 29th.
Second.
Thank you. I'll roll call the vote. Ms. Antonellis?
Aye.
Mr. Aponte?
Aye.
Ms. Tierney?
Aye.
Mr. Pomerantz?
Aye.
And the chair says aye. All right, next item is the FY22, FY2023 budget updates.
Mr. Chair, why don't we, I know that Barbara and Fred and the rest of the finance folks have been primarily working on closing out FY22 and obviously preparing for FY23. Maybe start with Fred from the FY22 front on the closeout. Any issues or anything you want to offer?
There are no issues. All we're doing now is getting our ducks in a row so we can get the free cash certified as soon as possible, but I don't see any issues. Nothing negative.
Thank you, Fred.
Barbara, on your end on revenues as well as looking forward to FY23.
Yep. So as of just a couple hours ago, I finished reconciling cash to my bank statements and to Munis. So it's ready for Fred to take it from there. Revenues are still above our or on our target of having over 98% collections. I did not get demands out until the beginning of July, just due to a whole bunch of different scenarios, but it shouldn't affect us in any real negative way at all. And we are right now collecting August 1st due payments. So we're busy and things are going along just fine for that. That's about it. That's all I can think of. Do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions.
Okay.
I'll open up to any other questions from everyone on the meeting.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
You broke up a little bit. I couldn't hear.
Sorry. No worries. Okay. Next item is discussion on the review and update of the town's financial policies, timeline for completion of the review process.
Mr. Chair, I'll start. So I know that we've been talking quite a bit from meeting to meeting about updating the financial policies and completing that review, which does need to be finalized by the end of this calendar year. And what I mean by finalized is by the latest, absolute latest, at the end of this calendar year, the policies would have been reviewed and updated with the appropriate public presentation to the select board and the FinCom and all of the parties signing off. So what I wanted to do briefly through the chair today is if we could spend a few minutes to sort of map this out. What I mean by that, so Barbara has originally was collected comments from folks on their review. I know she has some things from Scott, some things from Pat Diamond before. I think what we want to do is finish our internal review, meaning from the buy board end. And then we talked about sending it out to all of the departments for their, review and input. And I just think that we should make to the extent we can, sort of a scheduled timeline so we can bring this to conclusion before the end of the calendar year. The other thing I would suggest, and welcome Kurt, and I think it's great once as the FinCom gets reconstituted and up and going, perhaps we could also, for one of those initial meetings of the FinCom, because there's a lot of new folks, which is great, is maybe do a brief overview of the financial policies, the major components and some of the major areas for potential change or update. And Kurt, Mr. Chair, just through you, just to introduce to everybody, Kurt, and if you could just pronounce your last name so I get it right.
No problem at all. It's Kurt Frazkowski.
Frazkowski, okay.
Yes.
So Kurt Frazkowski is one of the newly appointed members of the Finance Committee by the town moderator, and was kind enough to join us today, sort of first buy board meeting, which these are public meetings open to anybody, but historically have had the chair and the vice chair of the Finance Committee have been sort of members of this group. So I know that's another step of business when the FinCom first meets, is to organize. But Kurt, welcome, and
Thank you.
We look forward to working with you. So that's what I had. I think so on the financial policies. What if step one is if Barbara would be so kind to send out one last time to the buy board, the financial policies with sort of an email that you get all of your potential changes. And we're looking for everything from the substantive to even spelling errors, you name it, because it's a living document in that sense. For our August meeting, I know we got to set that date at the end, but if we could in the next month before the August meeting, at least get all of the buy board stuff in. And if we could get that in maybe a week before the August meeting, so we have time internally to put together something for this meeting. Our August meeting will have a shared screen where we can highlight the major changes. And I know there are some new policies for August. And then from that August meeting, go over that. And maybe we would be in a position then to send it out to all of the departments and interested parties. And as Selectman Hood brought up last time, and I agree with, is we want to give a robust amount of time for departments to get back to us. In other words, not like here you have it for a week or 2 weeks, but we had talked about maybe a month or even 2 months. Define that for all of that final intake. Then we would put that together, the buy board. And then from that point, I think we would be in a position after the town review to present to the FinCom and to the select board, as we've done in the past, the major changes and looking for their consideration. And we could put this, I know I've given it out orally, but we could put this in an email as well. What do folks think of sort of that approach? Because we do definitely want to get this review and update done, but we want to get it done right. And we also know that in 2 years, we'll be doing another one.
I think it sounds reasonable. I mean, to have some kind of a timeline will help.
Yeah, I agree. I think for this group to get everything back by August, and then we can do our review and put the final touches on it. I would say for the departments, probably a month.
Okay.
Because I think if we go any further, my concern is we're going to start the budget process without the policies finalized.
Okay, good point. So why don't we do this? Oh, Barbara, go ahead.
I just wanted two things. I just wanted to make sure you're aware. I did send a copy to Linda on the finance team.
Mhm.
And we had talked about sending one to the water DPW superintendent ahead of time because we hadn't really looked at their water sewer in a long time.
Okay,
Ahead of time before the other departments. Did we still want to invite him to come to look at it, or is it, we're just gonna wait until we have the other departments review?
I would suggest that we incorporate them with all of the departments for the
Okay.
review, and then we could have him, he being the DPW director, if needed,
Yeah.
to talk about the water and sewer piece.
Just because it's substantial compared to what
Right,
the other departments have, yeah.
Yep.
And the only other thing, would it be helpful if I took Scott and Pat Diamond's spots in the financial policies where they're looking for discussion and did a quick bullet listing to send out instead of having everybody have to look through it for the next meeting?
sure,
To have the discussion points ahead of time already kind of spelled out?
yep,
Okay.
yeah, if you do that, that'd be good.
Okay.
So,
And
just through the,
Robert,
yeah,
really, real quick, when we send it to the departments too, I think it may be worthwhile to, I don't know what you think about this, but just put it out there for public comment in case residents want to weigh in ahead of time.
yeah, good point, Carly. So I think,
Mhm.
good point, through the chair, I'm sorry, Scott. So
It's okay. No
so
worries.
why don't we do
Oh, my
this?
apologies.
So we're gonna send out, my office and Barbara, we're gonna send out an email to this group with the financial policies, with a bulleted highlighting the changes we have to date. And those changes were initial changes from Scott, and you may have some more since then, Scott. I know it was a bit ago, Pat and what have you. We'll send that here, and we need everybody, myself included, we just do a deep dive in the next month, that we get that all back to Barbara, and whatever we set as the August meeting date, we'll say a week by a week before then. So we'll have that. At our August meeting, we'll have a shared screen, a brief presentation to highlight the major changes. Obviously, the presentation, all the little corrections and so forth, we're not going to go through. But for example, of the proposed UDAG policy, the proposed compensated balance policy, some of the new, we'll do at the August meeting, we'll have an update of the material from this group. Plus, you'll have the document, with those changes. Then at the August meeting, in addition to that presentation, we will, at that point, decide the date to send out to the departments for their review with the deadline. And to Ms. Antonellis's point, I think simultaneously, as it goes out to the departments, we can put it on the town's website, a dedicated spot for any public, input or so forth. And then once we have all of that input, then this group, we could do one more final review, and then we could talk about going to both the select board and the FinCom for sort of the, historically, as Scott knows, has been brief public presentation at both of those boards, culminating in, ultimately their support. So that would put us maybe getting everything towards the end point, say October, November.
I think that's a good time frame.
All right, and we'll put that in that email we send out so everybody has it, and it'll be in the minutes. Okay.
All right. Anything else for discussion on the policies? No? All right, excellent, thank you. So moving on to discussion on proposed ARPA spending policy and plan.
So I'll kick it off, Mr. Chair. Again, as we've been talking about in terms of the town's ARPA spending, we have about a total, we were awarded a totally about 2.4 million, just for everybody's benefit. And to date of that, a portion of that was authorized by the select board for the Westford Road water and sewer line. So if you haven't been out to Westford Road, that project is underway. There's some of your ARPA funds at work on that. There's about 1.4 million remaining, and that's in an account right now. It's interest-bearing account And as we've discussed, we have to have it committed by 2025 and spent by 2026. So we do have some time in that sense. However, as we've been discussing, and I think this is another one that we want to get teed up for this year, meaning the balance of this calendar year, is ultimately the town should have an opera spending policy, something that, you know, is reviewed by the FinCom and approved by the select board as the policy making board. This opera spending policy would not necessarily be part of the financial policies. It could be an addendum to that, as well as a plan. What are folks' thoughts on that? So, I mean, right now, we haven't lost any time. We still have time. We also have a consultant on board, which is CLA, which we'd hope to get for this meeting. But I was thinking if Fred and I, if it's of interest, we could get somebody from CLA maybe for the August meeting to give sort of a brief overview on this, what you can and can't spend it for. And also they're working with multiple municipalities. They could also discuss, you know, some maybe best practices for spending policy and the spending plan. So I'm thinking for the August meeting, those could be our two big things. One would be the financial policies, and then have somebody from CLA.
Sounds good.
So why don't we, Fred, we'll try to get somebody from CLA
Yeah, I'll reach
down
out
for
to
the
them.
August meeting. We'll have them make a very brief presentation on what you can and can't spend it on. And there's a lot of information out there, as you've seen, but that's also why we have the consultant talk about what you can and can't use it for. And then we'll ask them, Fred and I, to maybe a version of a best practices spending plan or so forth. And I think one of the things, I'll speak from my vantage point, and maybe others would agree, maybe some would disagree. I do think that there is some value in our spending plan to have some type of competitive process for a portion of the funds. In other words, you've heard in some communities, for example, there's a process where departments apply for various projects or programs. They obviously have to be opera eligible. And then there's, you know, they're ranked and so forth. There's some kind of competitive process. I think that there's some value to that, and for at least a portion of the funding. And I also think there's value to a portion of that funding being opened up to the community to apply for. And I'd like to hear from CLA a little bit more on those parameters, like who can apply, who can't, type of thing. And I'm not saying that has to be all of the funding, because we don't know what all of the needs are over the next 2 years, but I think that would be a good starting point. Okay, so we'll get CLA here for the August meeting.
All right. Thank you, Robert.
Mhm.
Any other questions or comments on the ARPA discussion? No. Okay. Item number 6 is the initial discussion on development of the FY 2024 budget process calendar.
All
Feels
right.
like we just finished the last budget, but let's talk about the
Yeah.
next one.
I was just gonna say, we just finished and we don't want to rush summer, though it's already August next year. So just as a reminder and for everybody's benefit, this has worked, from my vantage point, I think this has worked well overall the last few budget cycles. When Scott and others, we started with this. The concept is to have obviously a townwide, and I'm saying some of this for Kurt's benefit and others, is to have a townwide budget calendar that has all of the major budgetary dates and so forth on it, as well as town meeting dates. And it's sort of a public community tool to keep everything moving, you know, with us on a schedule. And so what has happened in the past is by their first meeting in October at the latest, the select board will ultimately approve that calendar. And then any changes to that calendar in terms of deadlines and so forth have to be subject to approval by the select board. And we put that in there so the deadlines are as definitive as can be on this calendar. And if there needs to be a change, there has to be a process. Otherwise, it wouldn't have that sticking power. Now, granted, there are some things that come up that are unforeseen, like in 2020, there was this thing called the pandemic that changed some things beyond our control. What I would propose that we do for the August meeting is after this meeting, but in advance, Harley has been sort of the keeper of that calendar. So why doesn't my office send out in advance of the August meeting? We'll take a look. We'll just do a draft. We'll take a look, with Fred and some of the other folks in this group. We'll sketch out updating the dates in what we'll call a draft. And then we can discuss more in August. Now, I think from my experience, there are a couple things that we do need to look at with a little bit of detail. One of the challenges that we've observed with the calendar is there's still this compression towards the end of the budget process and town meeting. So you'll recall, we know town meeting is the 4th Monday in April. So we build back from that. And I think everybody on here will agree, because we've all sort of experienced it. And this is a work in progress, and I think we're making progress. But one of the things, we still have this compression. So when the budget is finalized, from that time to the time of town meeting has been a very short window. So let's look at that as we're reviewing, this draft, to see what do we have to build in on that end. The other two areas, and this is just from my experience, and I'm sure others may have some other thoughts. So that one is what I'll call the compression piece. The second piece is the amount of time that is scheduled in between each of the budget versions. So generally, there's been about 4 drafts of the budget historically. There's draft 1, which is the initial, which is usually transmitted to the public, the select board, and the FinCom that first week of January. Then there's a second draft, usually in February. Then there's a third and sometimes a fourth that March, April, hence the compression. I think we need to look at that piece as well, because some of that has gotten compressed. And then third is, do we want to, and to what extent is this of value? Do we need to move up some of the aspects of it? In other words, historically, the budget directive has gone out the first week in December, giving departments a month to submit their initial requests. I guess it's somewhat of a rhetorical question, but thinking about this is, are there some aspects of the budget process, and we may not have the answer today, that could be potentially accelerated to free up time? So that's sort of my just initial thoughts. Others, I think others may have some other suggestions, but for step 1, why don't we just get a working rough draft? My office will take care of that, get that to everybody in advance of August. And then let's look at some of these issues. But through the chair, there may be other thoughts.
Excuse me, I think that's a good idea. Once we get your timeline, then we can look at tweaking it and come up with suggestions.
Fred, question for you. Curious, since you're new, what was the process? You were in Sterling before, correct?
Yeah. Well,
What was that process like?
Robert and I talked about it. It's very similar. Very similar. So the dates are all really close. Their town meeting's a little bit later in the year, but it's very similar. So I should have some input on that when I see it.
Okay. And then Robert, you said, so we had 4 versions of the budget last year. I'm looking at last year's calendar. So we only had 2 public presentations on the budget. Are you talking about possibly doing either more public presentations, or are you looking at, instead of having the 4 versions of the budget, we say we're having 2 versions of the budget, one for the first budget presentation, and the next version doesn't come out until we're ready to do the second one?
Scott, I'm leaning towards, and this is just my opinion, your scenario too, in
Okay.
using, so we have that initial budget, which is the easier part. And then instead of having multiple drafts, and we still could, but I think having then that second draft be more of the final.
I think one thing that might help facilitate that is when we do put together the initial budget with the submissions, and that goes out as version 1. We do the public presentation based on that. Instead of
Okay.
having full versions of the budget running out there, because it does get confusing when you're, you have multiple emails with different versions, is maybe doing a budget tracker that shows just not the full budget, but just what has changed.
Okay,
So when we build the budget, we know that, based upon what our revenue and our operating is, here's our number that we're working for free cash is usually where it ends up. We can just kind of hear the changes over the last week or 2 weeks, and here's how the needle moved before we get a full budget presentation sent out to everyone.
I like that. What do you
Okay.
think? What do you
Nice.
think, Fred?
Yeah, I like that too. I think that'd be great.
Carly?
I was just gonna say I like that too, because, between, I can speak for the years past, between Lisa, Robert and I, we always have, the most up-to-date version for us internally before we
Mhm.
put it out. And that could change 50
Right.
times. But it's how many times do we put it out? Because we don't want to confuse the public per se. So, but we, obviously want to be transparent too. But, it helps us in crafting that bottom line once we know, okay, the school assessment's in, okay, we have health insurance, et cetera, et cetera. So we keep some internal versions. But yeah, you're right. I think the less, if we just do the tracking and highlight what the changes are, I think that's going to be more clear for the public.
And maybe we build into the schedule, Scott, to the extent we can. Maybe there's, even if it's weekly, or let's not get caught up, but actually have like the tracking dates. In other words, as things change, every Friday from such a point, or every Thursday, here's the updated track changes. So I do like that budget tracker idea, because of course there's going to be that initial budget, that's the initial submissions. We generally have the initial budget presentation, and then from there, what's have it very clear, on the tracking moving forward. Because one of the feedback pieces I did get from a few folks is with the multiple drafts, just as you said, Scott, it did get a little confusing, and there's all these drafts, 2, 4, 3 banging around. So I think so that we make progress on this front related to the budget. Well, I'll save it for new business. Let's keep to the budget process calendar. So what I have right now on the minutes, the plan is Carly and our internal folks will send out to this group in advance of the August meeting a draft shell. It will be the rough draft, which is going to basically take last year's and update the dates and so forth. We'll send that to you. Everybody take a look at that. And then at the August meeting, at least a portion of the time, we could discuss, the further refining of that and development of that. And again, that's why we usually, by the first meeting in October, want to be in a position where the board's approving the calendar. Okay.
Yeah, so just while I'm looking at the calendar here, so we have the submissions come in, which would be, I guess, our baseline submission budget. And then it looks about 3 weeks later, we did the first budget presentation. So from my view, we'd have that preliminary with just the submissions. And then at the public presentation, that would be draft 1 that goes to the public. And then we just track until we get around to the second budget presentation, that would be 2. And then we always have a few last minute changes going into closure of the warrant. That would be 3. So I think 3 total after our baseline.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think conceptually that we're on the right track. Yeah.
Does capital planning or any of the, like the rate review committee, does moving, I guess one thing to think of is moving those ahead, say even by 2 to 3 weeks, help the overall process to pull everything together?
Yeah, Scott, I've been thinking of that, like, so for everybody's benefit, the capital, usually that directive would go out, it was like the end of October or beginning of November. And then I know the capital planning committee met a lot during December and January, the holidays. I'm thinking we could move the capital up a few weeks. I'll take a look at it. There's no
I
reason.
agree. Yeah, I think looking, because going through the process last year, because we had to circle back on a few items,
Yeah,
that ended up being, that was the piece that pushed into December, which then we ran into the holidays. So then it got pushed, a couple of meetings got pushed into January. So if we could, I guess, try to see if we can get the budget, the capital piece done by the end of the year, I think that might be a good dividing line. We can try that and see how that works for this year.
okay. And I'll check the same when the rate review committee meets, we'll take a look at what their schedule for setting the rates, if there's anything that can be done. I will say one of the added benefits, the sooner that capital finishes its work, because there's significant water and sewer capital, often the rate review committees waiting for the water and sewer capital in order to build the rates. So maybe there's another added benefit by accelerating the capital process, but also provide some of that information that the rate review committee needs sooner. So yeah, let's definitely take a more detailed look at that for August.
All
The
right.
good news is we only have one collective bargaining agreement this year that's expiring. We had 3 last year, so that should be smoother. And then as you look at the calendar draft we send, if there's some things on there that we've had on there that aren't a helpful or value that you think should be pulled, we're all open ears. If there's some things on there that historically we haven't put on there, that should be on there, make a note and definitely let us know as we put this together. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other questions on the budget calendar? No? Okay. So next item is new business. I'll open up for any items to discuss for new business.
Just one, Mr. Chair, that I'd just like to put
Yep,
on
please.
the table. Related to sort of the calendar, I think what we should be thinking about as we develop the budget process is, and it's a work in progress, let's think about the content of the public budget presentations. I think, in other words, like we can look back again and watch the videos and so forth. Is there a different format? Is there a different approach? Is there a different, now would be the time for us to begin to think about that. And again, we want to look to make changes that would be, obviously beneficial, specifically for the public on the presentation. I know that we will have, forgive me the broken record, but Fred has been making some progress on this about the ClearGov piece. But I think also looking at some of our materials and so forth, do we need a new look? Do we want a new look? So I just put that out there, Mr. Chair,
Okay.
for people to think about. Budget presentations, budget materials, any room for improvement or changes. Now's the time for us to begin to think and plan for that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Robert. All right. Anything else for new business today? No, see a few shaking heads, so I think we'll move on. Item number 8 is scheduling of our next meeting. So Robert, you mentioned an August meeting. Do we have a tentative date that you want to throw out for that?
Let's see. I'm just pulling up the. So the select board is meeting on August 16th. We generally have been meeting on Tuesdays at 2 remotely, just so everybody knows they've extended the remote provisions now through March of 2023. So we don't have any issues with the Zoom.
What about
Is
the
it?
23rd?
What does the 23rd look like at 2?
That would work for me.
Yeah, me too.
August.
Are there any vacations we need to work around?
So I'm not available that day, but I can get everything to Robert ahead of time.
Okay.
Yeah. So what if we shoot for Tuesday, August 23rd at 2?
Fine.
Sounds good.
I'm in.
Kurt, that work with you?
Yeah, I'm good. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
I
Kurt, does that
captured
work?
audience here anyway.
I know, yeah. All right. Anything else for our next meeting? So we're gonna have the discussions on the budget calendar. We'll have the financial policies for review, or at least the changes will be due. All right, excellent. Okay, before we come to adjournment, I'll just open up for any questions or comments while we have everyone together.
Nothing.
Okay, excellent. And I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Second,
All right, I have a second. Roll call the vote. Mr. Aponte,
I.
Ms. Antonellis,
aye.
Ms. Tierney,
I.
Mr. Pombriand,
Aye.
and sorry, I'm not going to say your last name, Kurt.
Yes,
You're on
aye.
mute, Kurt. All right,
Yes.
thank you. And the chair says aye. Thanks everyone for your time today. Have a great afternoon.